Welcome to a deep dive into a topic that's fascinating and, kind of cringeworthy.
Yeah.
We're going back to the 1700s
Okay.
to look at the medical treatments women had to deal with back then.
Wow.
Treatments that will definitely make you appreciate modern medicine.
Right.
We're looking at a podcast episode that really dives deep into this world.
Mm.
And I have to say, I'm already feeling grateful for things like antibiotics and pain relievers.
It's definitely a journey that shows us how much our understanding of health and the human body has evolved over time. What's particularly interesting is that while medical science was in its very early stages, women's health was often viewed through a very different lens than it is today.
So first up, something that really made me do a double take, liquid mercury. They actually gave women liquid mercury as medicine. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, to understand that, we have to go back to the main medical theory at the time, this idea of humors.
Okay.
These were thought to be fluids in the body, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile.
Got it.
And each of these was believed to have specific qualities like hot, cold, wet, or dry.
Okay.
And the idea was to keep these humors balanced for good health. And mercury was seen as this substance that could actually regulate these humors because of its unique ability to go back and forth between a liquid and a solid state.
So it's almost like they saw mercury as this kind of magical, transformative substance, like alchemists trying to turn lead into gold.
Exactly. There was this belief that if something could transform itself, it could also transform the body and restore its balance.
Of course, now we know that mercury is incredibly toxic.
Very much so.
Poisoning insanity, leaving death.
Right.
Not exactly the kind of balance they were hoping for, I guess.
Not quite. It really shows how even practices that had good intentions can have some pretty awful results when you don't have the right scientific knowledge.
Yeah, for sure.
It also highlights how medical understanding is always changing. It's amazing to think that mercury went from being seen as a cure to being mainly associated with thermometers these days.
Huh. That is interesting.
Tools that we use to measure our health.
Okay, speaking of treatments with unintended consequences, the podcast episode also talks about this thing called balneotherapy, or as they called it back then, taking the waters. Sounds almost nice at first, like a spa day. But
Spas and natural springs were thought to have healing properties in the 1700s.
okay.
And women would soak in these baths trying to treat a whole range of ailments, from infertility to what we would now call postpartum depression.
I'm picturing these crowded, unsanitary baths. Not exactly the relaxing spa experience we might imagine.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
The reality was a far cry from the idealized image. Overcrowding, poor hygiene, and even the potential to spread disease were some of the unfortunate side effects.
Yikes.
These practices, while rooted in a belief in the healing power of nature, sometimes cause more harm than good.
It makes you wonder, did women ever question any of these treatments, or was it just accepted as the norm?
It's a great question. Sources from that time are limited, but it's very likely that women under pressure from society and with few other options just went along with these practices.
Okay, brace yourself for this next one. The episode talks about bloodletting. And not just a little prick. We're talking leeches, large incisions, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
I mean, how did anyone think that was a good idea?
It all goes back to that humoral theory again. Bloodletting was seen as a direct way to get rid of excess humors and rebalance the body.
And the side effects. Let me guess. Not great.
Well, anemia, fatigue, even death from losing too much blood were pretty common. What's really striking is how bloodletting continued for centuries, even as other medical practices started to change.
It makes you think about how deeply rooted some medical beliefs can be, even when there's evidence that says otherwise.
Absolutely. It highlights why it's so important to think critically and challenge the accepted norms, even in healthcare.
Okay, ready for another one that might make you cringe? Vaginal douching was apparently all the rage back in the 1700s. And we're not talking about the gentle kind you might find at the store these days. Vinegar bleach?
Bleach.
Yes, bleach. And all sorts of herbal concoctions were used for douching.
Oh my goodness.
I'm baffled. What did they think that was doing?
This gets into the fascinating and sometimes disturbing ways that people viewed and understood women's bodies back then. Douching was promoted for cleansing the reproductive organs, curing infertility, regulating menstruation. Basically a cure-all for any female problem.
Wow. And how effective was it really?
Not at all. In fact, it probably caused more harm than good.
Oh.
We now know about the delicate balance of the vaginal microbiome, which those harsh douches would have completely disrupted, leading to infections and other complications.
So another case of good intentions gone wrong. I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah, I'd say so. It really shows how crucial it is to understand the science behind medical treatments and not just rely on tradition or what's popular.
All right, so before we move on, I have to ask about this one, penis herbs.
Penis herbs.
You can't make this stuff up.
This brings us to fertility treatments, which were quite creative, shall we say, back then.
So tell me more. What were these penis herbs all about?
Well, the belief was that if you could increase male virility, somehow you could also boost female fertility. These herbs, often made from boiled animal parts or other strange ingredients, were given to women who were trying to get pregnant.
It sounds like they were desperately searching for solutions in a world where they didn't really understand reproductive health.
Exactly. It highlights the immense pressure women face to have children and the lengths they were willing to go to achieve that goal.
It's both fascinating and a little bit heartbreaking to think about.
I agree. It makes you appreciate how far we've come in understanding women's health, especially reproductive health, but also how much further we still have to go.
We'll be back in a flash to continue exploring this fascinating and sometimes cringeworthy chapter of medical history. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back, and I gotta say, my head's still spinning a little from those penis herbs. But before we get too far, I think it's worth taking a moment to think about how resilient women were during this time.
Oh, absolutely. Having to go through these treatments
Yeah.
with results that were often uncertain at best or even harmful.
Right.
It says a lot about their strength and determination in a medical system that wasn't always looking out for them.
It really makes you think about how much societal pressure and expectations played a role in women's health experiences back then.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The pressure to conform to certain roles, especially when it came to motherhood, must have had a huge influence on why they were willing to try these sometimes extreme treatments.
It's a reminder that healthcare isn't just about biology. It's about the social, cultural, and historical context, too.
Exactly. And when we understand that context, it helps us see how even these practices that seem so out there to us now actually made sense to people back then.
Okay, so we've talked about mercury bloodletting douching.
Right.
What other interesting remedies were used for women's health back then?
Oh, there were plenty. For example, for menstrual cramps, women were often told to wear amulets or charms, or to drink concoctions made from herbs and animal parts.
Amulets and charms? That sounds more like magic than medicine.
Well, remember, this was a time when superstition and folklore were really intertwined with medical practices. The line between science and mysticism was pretty blurry.
I guess when you don't understand the science behind something, you look for other explanations.
Exactly. And sometimes those explanations provided comfort or a sense of control when people felt helpless.
So even though these remedies might seem strange or even silly to us now, they served a purpose for the people who were just trying to find relief.
Definitely. It reminds us that the history of medicine isn't just about breakthroughs. It's also about the human search for understanding and healing when faced with illness and suffering.
It's amazing how much our ideas about what makes medicine effective have changed over time.
It is, and it makes you wonder what future generations will think about what WE do now.
Right, like bloodletting, it seems totally crazy to us now, but back then it was mainstream medicine.
Exactly. What we consider normal or effective in healthcare is always evolving based on new scientific discoveries, technologies, and even changes in society's beliefs.
Which brings up an interesting question. What do WE do now that might seem completely bizarre to people hundreds of years from now?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really makes you stop and think about how our understanding of the human body, health, and disease is never really finished.
Just imagine someone from the 1700s time traveling to a modern hospital. Talk about culture shock.
Oh, I can only imagine. They'd probably be totally confused by all our technology, our medications, our surgical procedures. They might even think we're the ones doing crazy stuff.
Which is actually a humbling reminder that we don't have all the answers. What we think is cutting-edge medicine today could be outdated or even harmful in the future.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to always be questioning our assumptions, to be open to new discoveries, and to realize that medical knowledge is always changing.
So looking back at 18th century medical practices isn't just about history. It's about how we think about health and medicine in our own lives.
Definitely. It encourages us to be informed patients, to advocate for ourselves, and to stay curious about the ever-changing world of healthcare.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, what were some of the most important turning points in how women's healthcare has evolved?
That's a tough one. But I'd say the development of germ theory in the 19th century was a major breakthrough. It totally changed how we thought about disease transmission and led to big improvements in hygiene and sanitation,
Uh-huh.
which had a huge positive impact on women's health, especially when it came to childbirth.
Right. Childbirth used to be so dangerous for both mothers and babies.
It was. The arrival of antibiotics, modern surgical techniques, and prenatal care significantly reduced the number of deaths during and after childbirth.
And of course, the development of reliable contraception gave women much more control over their reproductive lives.
Absolutely. Contraception was a game changer, not just for women's health, but also for their social and economic empowerment.
So even though looking back at these old medical practices can be kind of cringeworthy, it ultimately shows how far we've come in understanding and caring for women's bodies.
I couldn't agree more. It's a testament to the hard work and determination of everyone who's fought to improve women's health throughout history.
And it reminds us that there's still more work to do. There's still so much to learn and discover about women's health.
Absolutely. The quest for knowledge and innovation in women's healthcare has to continue to make sure that future generations have access to even better and more compassionate care.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up part 2. We'll be right back to finish our deep dive into 18th century women's medical treatments. Stick around. We're back for the last part of our deep dive. And before we wrap up, I wanted to go back to that idea we talked about earlier, that what we think is normal in medicine today might seem totally wild to people in the future.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Like trying to predict what medical marvels or mistakes people will discover hundreds of years from now. It makes you realize how much what we know and believe about health and the body shapes our perspective.
It's true. Even with the best intentions, what we know about the human body and diseases could be wrong, or at least incomplete.
It's almost certain that some of what we do now in medicine will be looked at with the same kind of amusement and horror as we have for bloodletting and mercury treatments.
Oh, sure of it.
So as we finish up this deep dive into 18th century medical practices, what's the biggest thing you're taking away from it?
For me, it's a real reminder of how much progress we've made in women's self-care. While it's kind of mind-blowing to look back at some of these old practices, it's important to acknowledge all the hard work and innovation that have gotten us to where we are today.
And it's amazing to think about the strength and resilience of women throughout history having to deal with a medical world that wasn't always looking out for their best interests. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for listening and for all your great questions. We hope you've gained a new appreciation for how far we've come and maybe even a little more curiosity about what the future holds for women's health.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay well.